I hope you are excited. Today we're going to learn how to use our footage and create super cool effects and transitions just like this one in Adobe After Effects. Out of all of the programs in the Adobe Creative Suite, I must say that After Effects is probably the most intimidating program. That's just in my experience. Maybe you're more brave than I am. I mean, if you're watching this video, you are pretty brave. I salute you. After Effects gives me mixed feelings because the more we learn about it, the more difficult it kind of becomes. I mean, your practice gets a lot more efficient, but there is just endless amounts to learn and do in After Effects. 4 years later, I am still learning this program. The intention of this video is to make the entrance into After Effects a lot easier. That way you can get into more in-depth topics and effects, and it just opens up an entire world. We're going to touch on pretty much everything you need to know. So I've created a table of contents just to give you an idea of exactly what we're going to cover. That way, if you're already an intermediate learner in After Effects, you can skip ahead to whatever part you feel that you need. Or if you're watching this for the second, third, fourth, fifth time, if you just want to revisit a certain section of this video, you can do so with ease. Here's our table of contents. We're going to start by talking about how to properly import our clips into After Effects. Then we will talk about making a composition and what exactly a composition is. We'll go over a timeline in After Effects and what that looks like, how it's different from the other programs, and how to work most effective with the in-program tools provided by Adobe. From there, we will hop right into the detailed practice of stacking our layers, and then we're going to take on keyframing because we will need those for pretty much everything in After Effects. Creating a natural motion blur. From there, we will create a handful of effects with our video clip, like tracking, how to mask and what masking is, and adding additional effects. Then we will touch on rendering and how to export the best version of our end result. Not only am I going to walk you through this entire process, I've also provided project files for you. I would highly recommend downloading these clips and the project file because that way you can work alongside me and it will ease the process for you. Feel free to pause the video right now and go download that. The link is in my description. All right, so we've almost made it into After Effects. This is the page that should pop up when you click on the program. To get into the actual program, what we're going to want to do is go over here and click on New Project. And technically, now we're in it. Automatically, our files are going to be saved as an untitled project in our documents. So what we should probably do is go over to File, Save As, and here we have the opportunity to rename it, and then we can also choose the save location. That way our files don't get lost and we remember what it's actually named. So I'm just going to name this AE with colon. Feel free to name it whatever is best for you. We made it. We are in the program. So this whole setup right here is called our workspace. There are a ton of different panels in this workspace that are used for very different processes. We can completely rearrange and change everything that we see here. We can resize it, rescale it. We can add windows from over here into windows over here and create tabs. Adobe has provided us some basic workspaces that we can go and access as well. So let's go take a look at those real quick. All right, so now what? Well, a lot of these panels aren't going to come to life until we have something to work with. So let's take a few seconds and let's import some footage so that we can start learning. Much like every other Adobe program, there are multiple ways of doing each step of the process. So I'm going to show you a couple of different options of how to do all of these basics because I think it's important to have the option. All right, let's go over 3 different ways to import footage. First, let's go up to File. We'll scroll down to Import, and then we're going to either click on File or Multiple Files. We can go into our footage folder and we can grab these 2 clips. Or if we want to go back, we can go and find the keyboard shortcuts to do this. So let's hit Command-I, and then we can highlight our footage and click Open. Alternatively, we can actually just bring up our footage folder, and we can drag that directly into After Effects. At the bottom of this tab, we can go down and take a look. We can use this to interpret footage, create a new folder, create a new composition, which we'll get to in a second, or adjust project settings. Right now, we're just going to click on making a new folder. And then we'll either double click or click and hit enter to change the name of anything in our project window here. Remember, this project window is going to host all of the files in this project. This is where we will make our compositions, we'll hold our photos, videos, Illustrator files, or anything that we create throughout our project. This is comparable to the program window in Premiere Pro. If you're familiar with Adobe Premiere Pro or you watched my last video, you know what a sequence is. Well, After Effects uses something very similar, but it's called a composition. And a composition is not only like a sequence, it is also like a nest in the sense that you can create them and stack them into each other. We won't get too ahead of ourselves on that though. Let's just start by creating our own composition. So we can make compositions very similar to how we do it in Premiere Pro. In our main window, we have 2 different options. We can create a composition from scratch, or we can create a composition from footage that we import. Creating a composition from scratch gives us complete flexibility over our composition settings. Now again, this is very similar to our sequence settings. It's going to show us our composition size, it's going to show us our frame rate. There's also a bunch of presets in here. Now alternatively, if we go back to our main window, there is an option to create a composition from a file. Now this is a good method if you haven't imported your footage. All you have to do is click on this button, select the clip that you want to create a composition out of. Be sure to click the create composition button, and then you would simply click open. We're just going to cancel that for a second so I can show you another way to make compositions. But because we already have our files imported, and through the majority of the process, you are going to have a source monitor open with clips playing. The most common way to actually create a composition is just this little icon down here in the corner. So if you want to create it with custom settings, like for instance, if you only want it to be 5 or 10 seconds, 4K, that's a very good option. However, if you've narrowed down your clips or you want to match the render settings to the file that you've imported, you can either drag your file into that little icon, or we can drag it on the timeline right now because we don't already have a composition open. And as you can see, it is quite small at this moment, but we're going to go over that shortly. Now, I just want to emphasize, there are definitely advantages to both ways of creating a composition. Right now, because we haven't actually reviewed our footage or made any sort of selections, we don't know exactly which part we're going to use. So it is probably in our best interest to create our composition with the clip in its entirety for this current situation. However, if I am working on a specific project where, I'm creating a 10-second advertisement, or you have a set time frame to work in, such as a 10-second video or a 5-second video, whatever it may be, and you know exactly how you're going to export your file and what file format is best for you to render in, then that would probably be a circumstance where you can go and create a composition with custom settings. However, and either way, don't stress out about that. We can always go back up and we can change our settings of our composition. The only thing that I'm really going to emphasize is the frame rate of our sequence. Now, remember, our standard exported video is going to be 24 frames per second, much like this video right now. We can drag whatever video clips we want into our timeline, but if the clip you base your composition off of is a higher frame rate, we're going to want to go up to comp settings. A convenient way to access your composition settings is to go to your composition timeline and right click. Here, you can just click on composition settings, but you also have the opportunity, we're not going to use this right now, but if you hover up to new, you can create a multitude of different layers. You can create a text, solid, light, camera, null. You get the point. Alternatively, we can go up to our menu bar to composition and click on composition settings. Or for a keyboard shortcut, hit Command K. And here we have our composition settings. So as you can see, the preset is based on our footage. We can change the duration down here. We can change the width and the height of it. As you can see, our preset is no longer custom. It is set specifically to this clip, but at least it is in 24 frames per second or 23.976. Remember, you can always export at a lower frame rate if you would like. For example, this footage right now is 24 frames per second, but the screen recordings you see in this video are recorded in 48 frames per second, just so that they're a little bit more sharp. Again, creating a composition based on a clip will give it specific render playback settings, which should be best for that clip. However, I need to tell you the truth. After Effects is no fun for playing back footage. That being said, After Effects renders way slower than Adobe Premiere Pro. If we are working in a 60 frame per second workspace, we now have 2.5 times the amount of frames in each second. So not only could it take 2.5 times longer to render or export our video, but if we are doing frame by frame effects, which this program specializes in, we would theoretically have 2.5 times the amount of keyframes as our 24 frames per second composition. So if you are planning on exporting in 24 frames per second, I highly suggest making your composition 24 frames per second to save you that time and effort. But either way, we now have a composition. So we've created a composition and we understand why and how to do that. Let's go down and click on our clip. You might have already noticed our clip is very small. It is way thinner than Adobe Premiere Pro because in this program, the video is not necessarily the most important asset. It's going to be treated essentially the same as if we were in Photoshop or Illustrator. It's just another layer. But this is very quickly going to make a lot of sense to you. We need all this space. Even if we're only working with a few clips, our properties for our clips are no longer in the effect control Tools tab. We can actually access all of our properties in a drop-down menu from our clips. That's going to take up a ton of space in our composition, so it really does make sense. We're going to get to that shortly. But as we can see, our image quality is not the best, and our image isn't even fitting in the screen. So let's go over some of our composition tools. It's going to be very similar to Premiere Pro. I'm just referencing it because these programs work very well together. So let's hover down here to the left. Over here, we have our magnification tool. This is going to determine how close we are to our image while we're working in this workspace. We can choose a specific percentage of our frame, or we can just use mouse gestures, which is either pinching or expanding on your trackpad or scrolling in on your mouse, and that will zoom in and out for you. As you can see, the number changes in the bottom left. Again, this is going to be based on the size of your footage versus the size of your screen. So if we set it to 100% right now, it is way too big. That is because this is a 4K clip and I'm working in a 4K monitor. So just imagine the clip taking up literally the entire size of my monitor right now. So obviously it can't be contained to this small section. So this is where it is good to just use fit. And then even if you set it to fit, you can zoom out a tiny bit. And I find that to be the best framing to work with. Okay, now let's look at these other tools we have here. We can set up a grid, guides, or a ruler, or if you remember our title action safe, which is really good for centering clips or any sort of text effects. Mask and shape path visibility might not make sense to you at this moment. Just remember that it is here for when we get into that. And then we have the classic camera icon. Now this doesn't work like a screenshot in Premiere. Essentially what this does is it takes the current frame that you are working on and stores it in After Effects in order for you to compare with previous and future frames. It is not to export a screen grab. You would have to go up to your composition and export the frame that way. And then of course we have our playback resolution. So in all honesty, working in full is very difficult in After Effects. I typically play back at the lowest fraction of resolution. Remember that After Effects is not pre-rendering, so it's not going to be playing back in real time very often. To the right there are a few more icons, but this is going to be for when we get into working with cameras inside of After Effects and 3D modeling and pretty advanced stuff. And for today's tutorial, we're kind of going over the basics of After Effects and how to do things like masking, transitions, and just kind of understanding the program overall. Once we start to add the third dimension, things get really intense really quick. So my apologies if you were hoping to skip right into 3D camera building. I just don't feel like that's appropriate at this very moment. So I'm making the executive decision to move forward.
Oh, and look, our toolbar has now lit up.
Now that we have a clip in a composition, our toolbar has now lit up and is active. So let's hover over to the top left of our screen and let's discuss some of these tools really quick. First and foremost, we have already activated our selection tool. As we hover over these, you can see it displays both the name and the keyboard shortcut of each tool. And I would highly recommend memorizing these. Our selection tool is our main tool. Essentially just going to be selecting the layers that we're working on or pretty much anything else in the program. Remember that our composition window is pretty flexible. So we can move and drag around our clips and reposition and resize them all within the composition window. We don't even have to go to the properties to do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in some situations, but it is super helpful. However, if you're just trying to move around your screen, say you're super zoomed into your clip and you're just trying to focus on some minor details, that is where our hand tool comes in handy. Yeah, bad joke, I'm sorry. Our hand tool is going to help us move around our workspace. We have a magnification tool to zoom in. We have a rotation tool. The camera tool, again, gets into a whole nother dimension of video editing and effect editing, so that's not going to be for today. Let's skip over to this shape layer. If you click and hold on this rectangle tool, it shows us a few different shape options and super helpful for either creating masks or creating a custom shape. This will depend on whether or not you have a layer selected. If you have a layer selected, it will make a mask. We can use this rectangle tool to create a mask. If we wanted to create a perfect rectangle, just hold down Shift. Let's undo that, and then if we click off of our layer and then click and drag, you can see that we have created a solid shape. Might not be super useful at this moment, but it will be soon. A pro tip to using the shape tools, definitely remember to either hit Shift or Option Shift or Command to create a calculated shape size. Alternatively, we can just use a pen tool to create these masks or solids. We can click around and make a random shape, or we can select our clip and create a mask there. And then it's really nice to have a text tool here as well. Obviously, we just go, we can click, and we can start typing hi. And you might notice that as we activate these different tools, we have a different set of options over on the right side. We have our character, paragraph, and text settings available to us. Now, if you're quite Photoshop savvy, you might recognize the brush tool and different stamp and cloning techniques. After Effects also has these tools, but you're going to be working in a frame by frame situation. And to keep today's video an appropriate length, we really just don't have the time to get into these. Definitely feel free to go look for other tutorials on this, or keep your eyes open for upcoming workshops that we're hosting. As you might have noticed up in the top right, we have our different workspaces. Currently, we are in our default workspace. I feel like that's appropriate for our current situation. That way we can see all of our tools. But you should have a few different options listed up here. If not, click on the double arrow and it will show you the other options. These are all going to be very custom workspaces created by the wonderful people at Adobe. So for instance, if we're looking on creating different animations or working in very intensive effects, or we're doing motion tracking, text effects, I could go on and on. There are different workspaces for every single one. And as you click on these, you will notice that the panels are in different positions and there are actually different options for our panels, like you might notice in a few minutes when we go into motion tracking. Either way, if you don't see them up here, you can always head up to the menu bar and just go over to Window, Workspaces, and it should have all of your options here, as well as the option to save or update a custom workspace or reset to an earlier saved workspace layout. Again, for right now, we're just going to be in the default workspace.
The timeline is where we get to work.
Again, this is a very typical timeline. It is our time in a line. Speaking of timecode, our timecode is this bright blue numbers over here. We can use this to scrub forward and back in our time, or we can enter a specific number to go to an exact time in our composition. One thing you might have noticed is that we don't have a blade tool. To trim a clip in your composition, we're either going to have to drag either side, or there are obviously keyboard shortcuts for it. This one is going to be Option bracket for either side. It's going to be a little bit trickier to work with this, but as you can see, we have our entire clip right now and it's relatively long. Let's drag in our second clip so we can kind of talk about the hierarchy structure of After Effects. The top clip is always going to be the top dog. The uppermost assets, in this case clips, are always going to be prioritized or assert dominance over the assets underneath them. We still have our little icons over here to either activate or hide a clip, or to toggle the mute. But in After Effects, we also have this really cool one called the solo. So because we're going to have a ton of effects going on in this program, sometimes it's just going to get really difficult to see and understand what's going on to an individual clip or asset. We have this button to temporarily prioritize this clip and this or the solo clips only. That way we can see what's going on with that exact clip. Now, it doesn't affect the visibility in the composition necessarily. It is just a temporary hold. And then we can also lock our layers. Now, let me introduce you to something really cool called the Shy Guy. So as we're working in After Effects, we're going to have a ton of different layers, whether it's an adjustment layer or some other layer that is creating some sort of influence, but is relatively static. It doesn't need much changing or looking after, including null objects and other things that we probably haven't touched on yet. So if at any point your After Effects composition is getting way too hectic, all you have to do is activate this little Shy Guy and then click the Shy Guy up over here and it disappears. Now, it's not deleted. If we click on the Shy Guy again, we are going to see our clips. It is just strategic for organization of your composition. It is still there, you just visibly can't see it. It's still going to be affected by rendering. There are also a few icons beside our Shy Guy here, but we're going to talk about those throughout this video. That's going to be the motion blur and the 3D elements, and then alpha channeling. So let's hit our spacebar and take a look. Now, it is processing at a very slow pace. There is no yellow, red, or blank rendering like we have in Premiere Pro. Essentially, none of it's rendered. So when we're hitting play, we're actually rendering our clip. And we're gonna have to keep an eye on it, and it's just gonna keep rendering as we sit and watch here. Even if we click forward in time, if we click ahead in our composition, you can see that essentially it's just rendering that part. And now there's a gap between what we've already rendered and what we're currently rendering. Eventually, it'll make its way back around to go render the rest of it before it will play back. However, you can just render a specific section that you are trying to watch. So now that you understand rendering and how long it's going to take, we can understand the importance of frame rates and having the right size of clip in your composition and predetermined settings for your final export, especially frame rate and the length of the composition. All of this extra room is essentially dead weight and slowing down our entire process. Now, of course, there are workarounds for this, but they are not super convenient, and it kind of relies on you having a lot going on in your project. Essentially, what you can do is take specific parts of your video and render a video file for them. And this way you will replace the need to render over and over and over. However, we are only working with a single clip right now, so there is no use for us to pre-render, and it can very quickly become an intense topic that I don't want to distract too much time towards. For now, a quick trick you can use is to activate your caps lock. If you do this, you will see a red bar at the bottom of your screens, and this will stop your computer from giving you a render preview. And that makes this process a little bit faster. But for this video, we're just going to be patient because we want to see what is going on in this video. So I think it's important for us to see the render preview. So now that we have a better understanding of why it is important to keep our files as small as possible, let's go ahead and trim our clip. Right now we have a 12-second clip. I think that's a little unnecessary for what we're doing. So let's trim it into a selection. Let's cut right at this section. I think we should trim it right after we pass this first boat here at 11 seconds. I think this is a really good ending point, and we can actually tighten up the beginning a little bit. Now for the video today, the first part is just going to be flying through our text into a black space. But for those who want to see the entire transition, I will continue the rest of it at the very end. So we can activate our second clip here, and we can make a selection for it, but we're not going to use it until quite later. We're not going to use it for the majority of this video. Now that we have a condensed composition, we have a bit of extra room at the end here. That is essentially just blank space. We could go back up to our menu bar, go to composition and change our composition settings to an appropriate length, or there are these tabs over here that help us determine the work area in our composition. These are essentially like your in and out points. So wherever you drag them to is going to be the loop that plays in your composition, whether it's 1 second or the entire composition. So to make this more convenient for us, let's trim our work area to what we need. And now let's go up to our menu bar to composition, and we can trim composition to work area, or keyboard shortcut Shift Command X. This is a very helpful tool. Now that we're getting into editing, there are a few more tools that we can use here in our composition. If we hover down to the bottom left and we see this little mountain and this big mountain, that is actually our magnification tool for our composition. Or you can slide in and out on your trackpad or scroll in and out on your mouse. So as we drag this little slider over to the big mountain, that's essentially zooming in on our frames. This will be super helpful for when we get into frame by frame editing or making very precise changes. Take note of where our 1 second is now. We can actually see individual frames in our composition, whereas when we slide it back to the left to the small mountain, it is going to zoom out to the full scale of our composition. And now look, our 1 second is a lot closer to the left. And obviously now we can't see individual frames. Now, in order to fly through a title in this video, like we are going to do so, we need to create a title. So let's go up to our text tool and we'll drag it across our composition, and let's type in vlog 1. And just like the majority of any programs that work with text, we have our character tools, so we can change the size of this. We can change the different character and paragraph styles of it, and then we can go up and align our text to the center of our composition. And now we have made a title. Cool. So we have this static text on our video, and I mean, it's not anything impressive right now. So let's take it to the next level. Right before we get into effects, let's talk about effect controls. Let's go up to our window and activate our effect controls. Now, After Effects takes this very literal. The effect controls is literally only for applied effects. As I mentioned earlier, all of our changes to our properties is going to happen in our composition layer. Each asset has its own set of properties, and we adjust them in our composition timeline. For instance, I'll hop over to our effects tab, and I will create a drop shadow on this. Now our effect control tab goes from empty to having a drop shadow in it. Now that we have a couple of different assets in our composition, let's go over the different properties of these assets. We can click on this little arrow here to create a drop down to see all of our different assets and properties of our assets. Alternatively, there is actually a keyboard shortcut for every single property, and they're pretty straightforward. For anchor point, we hit A. For position, it's P. For scale, it's S. For rotation, it's R. For opacity or transparency, it is T. And as we briefly mentioned before, we have this icon over here to turn this 2-dimensional asset into a 3-dimensional asset. So let's click on it. Now, as you can see, some of our properties have become a little bit more complex. So we have a lot more options for our rotation. There's actually the whole orientation mode now. Even our positioning is now working on a new plane, which is the Z space. The Z space is essentially the forward and back motion of it. This is important to understand that it is not scaling. The main difference being that scaling might come with a side effect of compressing. So think about taking a low resolution photo into Photoshop and then making it 4 times as big. It's essentially the same sort of thing. We could ruin the quality of some assets by scaling them either too large or too small. The Z space will also be used and super helpful. We'll get into this in a little bit. But before we get ahead of ourselves, if you're going to start using keyframes and making changes to your videos and properties, let's talk about what an anchor point is. The anchor point is the central position of your asset, whether that be footage, image, file, or even just like an effect. All of your scaling, your positioning, and any effect properties that we add are all going to be centralized around a single point called the anchor point. It is important to know where your anchor point is and set it appropriately. It is very, very important for motion graphics, text, titling, a lot of different things. So let's go over some examples real quick. Now, if we reactivate our transform properties and we scale up, or if we were to do some sort of rotation, this is all going to revolve around a specific point on our asset layer. To better illustrate this, let's quickly drag our anchor point to the center of our text. Now, if we scale in and out, you can see it is controlled from the center of the text. Let's quickly put it back down to the bottom of our text. This is important for text effects and any sort of motion graphic work. You really want to make sure you're aware of where your anchor point comes in when we get into complex editing, because it will create a completely different look, and this program can get really confusing really quickly if we don't understand why our assets and layers are moving and acting the way that they are. Now, we have to talk about debatably the most important thing in Adobe After Effects, possibly video editing in general: keyframing. When I first started editing in this program, I really couldn't wrap my head around the idea of a keyframe because it seemed like it created infinite options. I was literally blown away by the endless possibilities that had just opened up. I honestly just couldn't believe it. But that's pretty much what it is. That's what it's made to do. A keyframe is the set value at a current time in an animated sequence. If we take a look over here beside our properties, we can notice an incredibly familiar stopwatch. This is going to be the start and stop of our keyframe. And to create a keyframe, all we have to do is click on this button. Congratulations, you have officially made your first keyframe. Or maybe not. Maybe you're just doing it because, I told you to do it. Maybe you made a bunch of keyframes. Maybe you didn't know what it was. Maybe I'm taking way too much credit for your accomplishments. Remember, a keyframe is essential to creating a change. Now, that means it needs to have a start and an endpoint, which means every keyframe needs a partner. And don't we all? Okay, in all seriousness, you need to have a start keyframe and an end keyframe in order to make an animated sequence. It's essentially telling our asset that, hey, at this point, let's start here. But then when we get to here, let's do something different. Or by the time we get here, let's do this. So let's scroll ahead over to our 2-second time mark and let's set another keyframe. The way that we can create keyframes is either first clicking on the stopwatch, and then using the diamond keyframe icon on the far left, we can set a keyframe. Or if we have already activated our keyframes, like we have, all we have to do is make a change to that property value and it will drop a keyframe for us. And now that we have 2 keyframes, it is doing a calculated change over time. Now get ready. I am about to change your life. These are the 2 main reasons why I use After Effects instead of Adobe Premiere. The first reason is having the ability to create a natural, real, clean blur. It is truly genius. It is built into After Effects to do this, and it creates a natural motion blur based on your positioning, scaling, rotation, and any other transformative keyframes. So if it's just a small change over time, it's going to be a really soft blur, but if you're doing really abrupt changes, it's going to create a very intense fast blur to match the motion of whatever your asset is that you're changing. You can't replicate this accuracy with different effects, but seeing is believing. So let's hover down here to the bottom left corner. Let's activate motion blur on this layer. And then also, much like the Shy Guy, we have to make sure that the motion blur is activated for the composition on this larger icon up here. We're going to scale from 0 to 100. When we actually scale something from 0% to 100%, that is not a proportional change over time. What I mean is the difference from 1% to 10% is a 10 times increase, which is 1000%. Whereas when we change from 90% to 100%, that's just an 11% increase. So theoretically, if we were to blur our text or whatever asset we're using at any given time, those 2 points in time, despite being the exact same amount of time passing, should look very, very different. And aside from motion blur, which is amazing for making this look more natural, we can use other keyframe assistants.
Second reason is easy ease. Easy easing is a calculated smooth adjustment from your A to B keyframe. Instead of having a linear progression, this calculates a smooth transition from one to the next.
Again, scaling from 0 to 100% is not going to be proportional the entire time. So to help with this, we can use the easy ease. If we select our keyframes and we right click, there's an option for keyframe assistant. It essentially takes your property change and makes it look a little more fun or a little more smooth. And this is going to be represented in a graph format, which is going to show you the change over time. So all we have to do is select our keyframes, and to view this graph, we highlight both keyframes and then we go over to our graph editor. Using the Easy Ease tool adjusts our rate of change over time. As we can see, the rate of change peaks at the very middle of the keyframes, meaning it will start slow, ramp up in speed, and then ease back down. In most situations, this will just create a more aesthetically pleasing look. Now that we've activated the keyframe assistant, we can actually adjust these rates of change. We can click on whatever keyframe we want to make changes to, and we have our little tool here, much like our masking tool, to warp the time and change. If we want something to appear really fast and intense, we can change the rate to be more intense at the beginning, slowly ease up near the ending. Alternatively, we can use the ones pre-made by Adobe by going back out to our graph editor, undoing our Easy Ease, highlighting and right-clicking, and we can use the Ease In method. Or if we want it to start really slow, and as it gets close to the end of the change, it ramps up really quickly, we can also do that. Or again, we can go back out to our composition timeline, undo our Easy Ease, highlight our keyframes, and use the Ease Out method. This will be, without a doubt, a game changer if you haven't used this yet. Look at the difference here on this graph editor. This is what it looked like before it had any keyframe assistance, and now this is what it looks like. And it's been one of the few tools that I've used over the years countlessly. Again, this is going to be completely based on what you feel is right for your edit. We're not even going to use this for our edit because we're not scaling in. But remember, you can use this on any other property, whether it be positioning, rotation, even transparency. You can create a change on any keyframe in this program. And that is why this is so powerful to understand.
We can take a quick break, digest, incubate all this information that you've just received, and then we will get back on track. You'll get the pun.
Okay, so let's reset our properties. We can delete all of our keyframes that we've made by clicking on the stopwatch. And then let's remove our motion blur because we don't need that. And let's reactivate our bottom layer so we can move forward.
Another beast in After Effects is the tracking tool. The tracking tool has the ability to analyze a clip based on the static objects in the frame, the things that don't move in your scene. In this video that we've made, we want to create a title that holds its place in Z space. Z space is forward and back. In order to keep it held in its 3D positioning, we need to track information from our clip in order to create the position as it moves through time and space. For the most part, After Effects does it for us. So let's try that out right now.
So let's go up to Window, Workspaces, and select Motion Tracking. We're going to close this tab over here by clicking on it. We don't need the content aware fill. And let's open up the Tracker tab. Of course, like the majority of After Effects, there's going to be multiple ways that we can track this clip. So let's go through them. I typically click on Track Camera first. This option has After Effects analyze your entire clip to find potential points to track based on the contrast in your image. Whereas if we click on Track Motion, we have to manually track every single keyframe to create our tracking clip. So let's make sure our clip is selected, and we're going to use the Track Camera method first. And let's see what it finds. Different clips perform differently with this, depending on how much motion and contrast is in your clip. It's going to try and find points of interest that are pretty sturdy and consistent. As you saw, After Effects has now analyzed and created a 3D camera tracker up in our effect controls here. If you see a big red bar, do not be concerned. This just means you are in the source clip. We are working in the composition. In our effect controls, we can click on our 3D camera tracker, and as you can see, a bunch of the points have now been activated.
After Effects has gone ahead and found a ton of different points of interest that we could use for tracking. It's really important to make sure you've selected the length of your clip because After Effects analyzes every single frame. So try to minimize as much as you can if you want to have a faster track. Maybe your clip took longer or shorter to track and find these points, but knowing what we want to use definitely helps us in this situation. This is our first taste of a frame by frame editing method. Now let's talk about this target that we see as we hover over the clip. What we want to do is try and scrub through, find a few points that stay in a relatively strong spot. They don't necessarily move. You used to be able to judge by the size of the X. If you're having difficulty seeing these, we can bring down the opacity of our clip and that way they will pop a lot more for us. If you don't see any X's or markers, whether you're in composition or if it says camera tracker failed, do not panic. We are going to use the other method in just a bit. So you can either skip ahead to that or you can hold tight and watch both methods. So to motion track an object, we're going to be analyzing 3 properties: the position, scale, and rotation, because we want our object to be tracked relatively sturdy. So what we have to do is create a 3-dimensional track, which means naturally we will be selecting 3 different points. Now there's definitely going to be some points that are way better than others, and there's a few ways that we can pick those out. The boat doesn't move much at all, and there's lots of points of high contrast. So we have a few options on this boat, and then if we go over here to this tree, it's relatively exposed for the majority of the clip. So this is also a really good option for us. So let's select this marker, hold shift, and we're going to click on this other marker in the tree. Let's try and create a right angle here, which gives us a steady horizontal tracker point. And now this target has popped back up. All we have to do now is right click and create a solid in camera.
And we have just made a 3D tracker. I bet you didn't think we were going to be working in new dimensions today, but here we are.
The reason why we choose a solid is because it's really easy to see. And we can change this out for pretty much whatever we need, whether it's text, a logo, or whatever graphics you want to put into the frame. So let's play this out really quick. And it looks really sturdy. This looks like a good option. If your shape is jumping around or looks a little finicky, I would consider choosing new points. So you'll just want to delete your solid and then find 3 new points and try that out. All right, let's take this to the next step. Let's reactivate our text. And as you can see, if we hit play right now, our text is still kind of just hovering in the exact same spot. So let's talk about something that is super important in After Effects called parenting. Parenting is pretty straightforward in definition. Think of the parent as a role model or leader. So there's the parent clip, and then there is the follower clips. Essentially, you want to select a clip and parent it to our role model. When we parent a clip to another, we're essentially guiding our selection to follow exactly as the parent does. Now, this is in scaling, positioning, rotation, pretty much copies all properties of the parent without taking any keyframes onto that layer itself. So let's click on this lasso whip, hold down shift, and drag it over to our track solid. This is super cool. Our text has taken the shape of the solid. To get our text accurately tracked, we're going to make it 3-dimensional. Now that it's tracked in space, we can hide our solid. So now our clip isn't going to scale, it's actually sitting in 3D space, which means it'll hold its resolution and quality throughout the whole clip. Now, as you can see, this is essentially a placeholder for us. Like I said earlier, we can change this to pretty much whatever we want. Now we can open up our properties on the text. Now we have the ability to reorient, rescale, reposition without affecting our keyframes at all. So let's do that. Let's double click on our text and change the word that we have here. We'll just type in text. As you can see, it's still holding its 3D space relative to our tracking points. This is super exciting, I know. So now that you kind of understand this, let's change our text back to vlog 1 and take it to the next step. I'm going to lose the number sign just so that our O is centered into the screen. So when we hit R, it no longer just opens up rotation. As you can see, there's rotation on every single axis. This is because this is a 3D shape. It has nothing to do with the tracking layer. It's just because our text is in 3 dimensions now. Our goal should be to have this red arrow and green arrow making a right angle. And then we want this blue arrow to be pointing directly at us. So let's play around with that until we get it. This looks kind of good. So again, we can set our own keyframes to this text because it's parented. So let's hit the letter T, open up our opacity, and let's fade this text in. Super cool. And this is a good time to use our title action save. So let's scrub forward a bit and make sure our text is centered with the effect that we're going for. And now we'll pre-render this and play it out. Awesome, this is going to work perfect. So what if this method didn't work with your clip? Well, we're going to go over the second method of tracking.
So if it's not working for you right now, or the clip that you're using just doesn't work properly with this method, we are going to go over a backup way of doing this. It's a more manual process. It's really good to know for future reference.
If you had luck with this clip and it worked the first time for you using the track camera, you can skip ahead, but I would definitely recommend sticking around and seeing how we do this in case you're using different clips in the future. I specifically selected these clips because I knew they worked with the tracking. It's definitely not always going to be this seamless and easy, so I would definitely consider sticking around because there's a lot to learn in this other method. If you're going to try both methods of tracking, try it in a different composition. Duplicate this composition so that we don't accidentally delete our tracker and lose all of the progress we did there. As we get into more intensive After Effects, we're going to be making a ton of keyframes. Sometimes you're going to get to a point where you've made a ton of keyframes, but you still need more, and they're going to start interfering with each other and cause a lot of issues. I know it doesn't make much sense at this moment, but there's going to be a time where you look back at when I said this and it's going to make sense. So let me introduce you to our best assistant in After Effects called the null object. All we have to do is right click in our composition and we can click null object. A null object is a placeholder. It's there when you need it and you can store a lot of information and bring it to action when it's required. Think of this as an adjustment layer for movement. This is important because remember, when we were tracking this clip in the other method, we tracked it based on its scale, position, and rotation. So what that means is After Effects set keyframes for us for all three of those properties for the entire duration of the clip. As you can imagine, that would look like a ton of keyframes. It actually looks just like this. So we don't want to be stuck with just those keyframes. What if we just want to do a small scaling up? What if we just want to slightly reposition our clip? Well, we can't do that if all of our keyframes are already taken up. We can ask our new friend, our null object, to hold on to this information for us. So that's a lot of information, I know. Let's just get to tracking this clip. Since we're going to be working frame by frame, what we want to do is quickly trim our clip to just the parts that we need to save time and be more efficient in this process. Now, it's up to us to scroll through our clip and find these points of high contrast that don't move too much. We have a bit of an upper hand because we've already tracked this one way, so let's grab some slightly different points. And I also want to note, the more moving objects we have here, the more difficult this is going to become. So working with water or moving trees is not always the most optimal. But okay, let's click on track motion. Let's just go over here quickly and make sure our motion source is the correct clip. Our current track is tracker 1, and our target is going to be our null object. That part's really important. Make sure you don't forget to edit the target at the beginning, or else we're gonna have to do it at the end, and sometimes it completely forgets what we tracked and we have to do it all over. Okay, so let's go pay some attention to this tracker point 1. As you can see, there's two boxes surrounding it. An outer box, an inner box, and then our tracking point. We can obviously adjust our outer boxes, but try not to grab directly on the center. You're going to be adjusting your tracker point position, and it's a lot easier to remember where it is if it stays in the center. So let's hover over to this boat. I remember seeing something. Here is a point of high contrast. As you can see, it's desaturated, it's really bright, and it clashes completely with everything around it. The smaller box is used to track a detailed object. So it's going to be our main tracking point and reference area. And then our second box here is going to be comparing the surroundings of our tracker box. This second box is going to let us know that we're tracking the top left, which is by the water. We want to track this with as much information as we can possibly get. So let's come back up to our tracker and activate our rotation and our scale properties. And as you can see, as soon as we have more than one property activated, a second tracker point pops up for us. Let's create a bigger box for us to grab, and let's go find this similar point in the tree that has some high contrast. This tree is really good for tracking because it's open and it's facing us the whole time, and there's no leaves brushing in front of it. So we essentially have our first tracker point. You might recognize this from Premiere or from our masking video that we did. If we click on the outer play buttons, we're going to go frame by frame, which if there's not a lot of frames or if you have a really difficult object to track and you know you're going to have to adjust it frame by frame, or things like creating a hyperlapse, you might just want to go frame by frame just to make sure that all the tracker points are looking good. What we can do here is get After Effects to do some of the heavy lifting and try and calculate the tracker based on the positions we've clicked. Now, if we click good positions, this can work very well. If we picked not so good positions, it will be all over the place and just look like absolute chaos. I guess there's only one way to find out. Oh, amazing. This did a really good job. You can tell. So I know it kind of just looks like a line, which is a really good sign, but those are individual tracker points that we've made. If we have any issues with this, we can scrub through the frame by frame and fix these individually. But let's go back to our first point and we'll track backwards. We can pause if we see any of the tracker points start to go way off. Again, After Effects did amazing for us. If, for instance, one of these frames were just out in the middle of nowhere, we can just scrub to that point in time, and we can reposition it and make sure it's still back on track. Or if your tracking looks half like this and half crazy, you can just scrub to the point where it lost all control, and you can recenter it and then hit play forward or play backwards again. And it will now have a new calculation for you, and it could actually fix the entire problem. So for example, here's our high contrast point on our tree. I'm just going to undo this so that I don't mess with our tracker. And we're going to come back over to our tracker tab and we're going to hit apply. Remember, we're applying to our null object. And bam! As you can see, our null object has now taken over the position, rotation, and scale of every single frame that we've tracked. This is a perfect visual of why this is so important. Because now if we want to rescale our clip or reposition it, we can. And it doesn't affect the rest of our tracking. Now that we have our null object, let's make some new text. Let's go up to our text tool, drag, and let's type in vlog 1. Let's move the anchor point on this just because of force of habit. And now we have our text. And again, now much like that solid, all we have to do is parent our clip to this null object. And as you can see, it's flipped upside down. That's totally fine. Let's just open our properties and change the rotation of it and reposition it. And as you might have noticed, we are doing a 2-dimensional track here. Our text stays 2-dimensional because we're tracking based on 2 points. Let's do some quick rescaling and repositioning so that we can still do our transition through the O. And there we go.
This looks great.
I mean, it doesn't look perfect. It's not 3-dimensionally tracked, so it doesn't look as good as our first method, obviously. But, I mean, nonetheless, it still works.
Now let's go back to the first clip and complete this transition together using an important tool and process called masking. Masking is such a huge part of the creative process. Once you have a handle on masking, you have unlocked a ton of different capabilities in the editing realm. So the goal is to fly through this letter into our next scene. Theoretically, what we have to do is cut a hole in our clip.
So let's cut a hole through this clip. Of course, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can do masking in Premiere, but I don't know, it's just, in After Effects, it just feels a lot more natural. Just like we did earlier, let's go up to our shape tool and select an ellipse. We can make a rough circle here by clicking and dragging to make an oblong or, a custom circular shape. If we wanted to create a perfect circle or a perfect rectangle, perfect whatever shape you're using, just hold down Shift. Or we can go up to the top or click G and use our pen tool to draw a circle. It doesn't really make much sense in this method because this is a perfect circle, so we might as well use a perfect circle mask. The nice thing about this is the text is covering up our mask, so we can make a larger circle and the text will keep it covered up and looking clean. Now, when we create a mask, it automatically becomes an additive mask, which means whatever you have masked is going to be what you see. We can open up our mask properties by double tapping M, and we're going to change this from an add to a subtract mask. Masks will also have to change over time as our subjects are moving, and because the drone is moving in this video, we're going to have to make sure we keyframe our mask to hold its position and size. Let's just set a keyframe here as a middle ground, and then we'll scrub to the end of the clip and set one of our base keyframes and set our primary mask. You'll remember why we do this if you've watched the masking video already. In After Effects, when masking, it is important to make sure you have whatever you are adjusting selected. So if we're moving the mask around, remember to make sure we have the mask selected. Selecting the layer isn't enough, it will actually move the entire layer around still. Let's drag our circle to the center of our O, and because these are perfect circles, we can just use our mask expansion for this one. So let's drag out our mask expansion until it's clearly covering the rest of the clip. And then let's move back in our frame. Let's just drag out our mask expansion to make sure it's 100% covered. So here's the thing, our masks have a few different properties, but it's based around masking a single object. What I'm trying to say is, if we adjust our opacity of our mask, because our mask is everything except for the hole that we've cut, we're essentially adjusting the opacity of our video layer. So the way we're going to work around this is duplicating and removing the mask from the layer underneath. So let's duplicate our video layer by selecting it, hitting Command and D, and next we will hit M to bring up our mask and delete the mask. So right now it might look a bit confusing because you can still see the entire clip behind it. You're actually seeing the layer underneath the mask. The mask is definitely there. So let's just hit P, bring up our position, and I'll just reposition this so that you have a better understanding. Now we're on the same page. Hit Command Z real quick, and let's fade this mask in. We don't want the viewer knowing that we're going to do this transition yet. So we're going to fade our mask in. Nice. And there we have it. That is our end transition. Okay, now let's use some of the things we learned and make this a little bit more smooth. Because we're doing a bit of repositioning, we can activate our motion blur to make this look a little bit better. You can use this as a transition, you can use it as the ending of a video, pretty much whatever you want.
Boom! This transition that we've done is not perfect by any means, but it is a cool way to either end your video or enter a new scene. I typically just go through the process very quickly to see if it's a viable option for a transition. Before we put a ton of more time and effort into making it look super realistic, we want to make sure it actually works and will sell. To make sure this video isn't too long or intolerable for those who want just the basics, I'm going to add this extension to the end of the video. We will go through the rest of this transition and how to go into another entire scene, but for now we are just going to show a cool way to end off the video. Now that we have a rough draft of this transition, let's take this opportunity to go deeper into After Effects and learn more about this program and what it's capable of for any transition.
So, the basics of our transition is now done. There's still a few unique ways that we can add to this. So let's take this as an opportunity to learn about blending modes. Blending modes are different ways to overlay a layer on top of another. This is really useful with things like lens flares, film burns, overlays. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a lens flare to this video. To get good lens flares, there's a ton of different options. Even if you just go to YouTube, you can type in a lens flare overlay. Or if you have a subscription base to something like Storyblocks, there's tons of lens flares in the video options. I'm not paid to say this. And then there's other options like lens distortions. I've used a lot from lens distortion. They all work really well. I've been super impressed with them. I have a few flares and lens distortions that I've picked up over the years and that I've paid for from different sources. If you don't have any lens flares, don't worry about it. You can just watch this and learn the theory until you do. Unfortunately, I cannot redistribute this lens flare under this license. It is illegal to redistribute it. As you can see, it is now the base layer of my video, is the uppermost layer, and it's taking over everything underneath of it. So let's just hit play, check this out. It's kind of cool, pretty subtle. The way that we add this to our video in an aesthetic way, we hover down to the bottom here and click toggle switches and modes. As you can see, all of our video effects, like our motion blurs and 3D properties, have now switched. We're now in blending modes and alpha channels, which they're pretty advanced topics. We don't want to go over that in this tutorial, it would be too much. So we're just going to hover over to our blending modes, very similar to Premiere or Photoshop, and we're going to change this layer to a screen. This lens flare is pretty subtle, but I always bring down the transparency of it just to sell it a little better and make it feel a little more organic. It very quickly creates a more professional feel to our videos. This one's pulsing a little bit too much for my tastes. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to go over retiming in After Effects. To enable retiming, we're just going to go up to our layer, hover down to time. We have time remapping, which is a little bit more difficult to use in this program than it is in Premiere. We have time reverse, which is essentially just playing our clip backwards, or we can create a freeze frame here. We don't need it for this one, but we're just gonna go with a time stretch. So this little window should pop up. It's gonna work a little bit different from what we typically know. This is not the percentage at which our clip is playing back at. It's actually working in the opposite direction. So if we type in 200% here, we're not making our clip 200% as fast, we're making it 200% as long. So our 5-second clip is now a 10-second clip. It is 2 times as long as our original file, which in Premiere typically looks like we would be cutting the clip in half. That's an important thing to note. Now let's just fade this flare in as if the sun was peeking out mid-clip. So now we have a slower flare. Looks a lot better and adds a bit of style to it. All right, let's pre-render this and play this out. Sweet, awesome. Let's go back to our default workspace. We no longer need these tracking tools. Let's talk about adjustment layers. I've explained this in a few videos. For the most part, I'm sure most people know what an adjustment layer is if you're already working in After Effects. But in 5 seconds, an adjustment layer is a layer that is essentially like a cloud. Anything you apply to it is going to affect the clips underneath it for as long as the adjustment layer lasts. It is an effect holder so that we can either stagger or stack effects on our clips and apply it to multiple things at once. So either right click in our composition to do this, or we can go up to our layer, new, and adjustment layer. Let's click on our effects and presets tab. As you can see, there are a ton of different effects. Obviously, they all do extremely different things. After Effects is, not surprisingly, full of effects. You can save your own effects and your own presets in this tab, which is cool. Feel free to go through all of these and apply them on at your free will. I'm just going to go over a basic effect with you. We're going to use our adjustment layers to color. To add effects, we can either drag it onto our layer, or if we have our layer selected, we can just double click the effect and it will apply to it. These clips are already colored with a base LUT, but when you start to add a bunch of effects or use multiple clips, it helps a lot to add an adjustment layer to help sell and blend the layers together a bit more. It makes them feel like they're in the same environment. Now I know we only have text, a lens flare, and 1 clip in this, but it's just a practice that I use. And for the sake of it, let's add another effect. Let's just add a basic Gaussian blur. Remember, our U key only works when there are keyframes set, so let's set a keyframe over the effects panel, and then we can hit U to open up, click on our adjustment layer and hit U. Let's scroll forward and create a ton of blur. Make sure you have repeat pixel edges on so it doesn't blur out the corners of your video. And there we go. Now, if you're noticing at this point, your After Effects is going a bit slower than initially was, it's because we're stacking up a lot of effects and it's a lot more difficult on the computer. A super important thing to keep an eye on in your After Effects is the media cache. When we render these clips, it's actually saving it as a saved file to play back for us. The longer your clips are, the higher resolution. This can very quickly add up to taking up a ton of space on your computer. When your computer gets full, it can't function very well. So we're going to go up to After Effects, Preferences. We're going to click Media and Disk Cache. So this little window will pop up. My maximum disk cache is 100 gigabytes, which for some computers, if you only have 250 gigs of solid state, that's taking up an absurd amount of space. You can very easily change it. Just click on the number and type in something different. And let's find out how much space I've taken up so far. As you can see, I've already used up 98 gigabytes of render files. As we're rendering, it theoretically creates and exports a video so that we're able to play it back and watch it. Yikes. Make sure you clear this. As you can see, it's going to take a couple of minutes for me to even just clear this because there's so much data in there.
At this point, we've now pretty much learned all of the basics that we need to know to get started in After Effects. Obviously, there is so much more to learn about this program, but I truly think that we've covered
most of the basics that we need to get started. I hope this video has given you the depth and knowledge and understanding that you need to continue. Now you can feel free to dive into other tutorials or to take a break and incubate with all of this knowledge that you've learned today. If this was helpful, hit subscribe and be notified of when I make new ones. Feel free to comment in this video on anything more in depth that you would like to learn. I will be making more videos on After Effects and a creative course on how to master it for your videos. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your support. Let's get into the rest of this transition. Now I got even more respect for you for sticking around and not giving up after we just started the transition. You are insatiable and I love it. Let's finish this transition. Let's deactivate our shy guy and bring back our second clip. Now we're gonna have to make this composition a bit longer. So we're gonna go to our composition settings and let's make this 12 seconds. By the way, you can rename your compositions here if you haven't. I'll just rename this to main real quick. And let's scale out, drag our second clip over and line it up with where our mask starts to fade in. So it looks okay. Maybe if we start this transition earlier, it will look a bit better. If transitions are too abrupt, they won't sell super well. Or let's just set it back as early as we can. We now need to add a new mask property, remember? So we'll just quickly reduce our mask expansion here. These scenes don't really mesh well together. So we're gonna fade this mask in and then we'll fade into our second clip. I'm just gonna trim up our composition space right here so that there's less to render. Fade out and then fade in. And if we really want, we can fade our text in a bit later into the clip so you get an idea of the scene that we're in before we introduce the text. And then the fading out kind of paces really well with our fading in. Another thing that I like to do is use this effect called transform. So let's create another adjustment layer real quick. So let's go over to our effects tab and click on transform. So an adjustment layer applies effects to everything below it except for property adjustments. So if we scale up an adjustment layer, it just changes the size of the adjustment layer. It doesn't affect any of the properties of the clips underneath it, which might sound obvious. So what we can do is use transform to set our own keyframes that affect everything underneath it. So let's just scale it up to create more flow to the clip, which we can then motion blur because we have it scaling. Let's highlight our keyframes and then we're gonna go to our easy ease and we're gonna easy ease out this time. And we're gonna show you what this looks like in the graph. So as you can see, the clips start to scale more towards the end. We can actually make changes to this. So let's click on this first one and let's ramp the intensity a little bit more. So as you can see from this graph, as we get further over time, there is a bigger increase in scaling. So that's right near our transition. And now it scales a bit faster through it. And finally, let's go over something super important called pre-composing. When you're in a situation where you've done a ton of work to a clip or multiple clips, maybe you've completely edited your scene, but you want to make an adjustment to every single clip, and you either need to clean up your composition, you want to either protect or adjust everything in it without affecting the layers individually themselves. What we want to do is pre-compose. It's turning this into a nest, or essentially its own clip. So to do this, what you want to do is select the layers that we're going to use, and we can either right click, scroll down and go to pre-compose, or we can just hit Command-Shift-C and it will bring up our pre-composition window. It's going to create a composition with just these clips. So we're going to move all of our attributes into the clip with it, which means all of our changing, our scaling, because we've selected multiple clips, we don't really have a choice. If you're just pre-composing a single layer, you have the option to either bring the property changes into the clip or you can leave them out. We'll go over a full video on pre-composing a different time. This is kind of just teaching you that it exists and how we can use it instead of things like adding more adjustment layers. So let's rename this to track and hit OK. And now our first scene is in this single layer. If we just wanted to scale our first clip and not our second clip, we can just apply keyframes onto this layer. these pre-compositions become a lot more intricate as we get deeper into After Effects. It's actually a major advantage of After Effects and an integral role in the program itself. So now that we've pretty much covered everything, this would be a good time to talk about pre-rendering. So the idea behind pre-rendering is to take all of the changes that you've made in your project so far and compress them into one single rendered video file, essentially like exporting. So if you were going to be going into further effects in this project, now would probably be a good time so that you don't have to try and render your clip every single time with all of the effects. So let's go over how to do that real quick. We're going to need to go up to File, Export, and Add to Render Queue. Now there are a couple of different things we want to make sure we check. Let's click on Best Settings. Now this is going to depend on whether this is your final export or just a draft. So you have a couple of different options for quality here. So if you don't want a huge file or don't want it to take too long, we can change these. For instance, we could create a draft at 1/3 resolution if we wanted to. But for this, we want to go with a full resolution file. So we're going to go back to Full and Best. Next, let's hover down to our Output module. This is important because this is going to be your video format. And if we click on Format Options, we get our video codec. Now I've made multiple videos on exporting and rendering, so I'm not going to go over each one of these file types, but if you want a ProRes file or any sort of different video codec, this is where you would change it. I'm going to go with an Apple ProRes 422 high quality. Finally, to change the name and location, we just go down to Output to, and I'm going to name this Render Final, hit Save, and now all we have to do is hit Render and wait. And now that we have a pre-rendered file, we can bring it back into After Effects. And as you can see, this renders way faster than if we were to try and play all of our files and adjustment layers and changes all at once. This render file will save us tons of time if we're looking to move forward in After Effects. And all we have to do is disable the other layers and use this render file as a placeholder until we're ready for our final export. Now that we've reached the end of our project and we have our final product, it is time to export. We're going to go up to File, Export, and we're going to be using Media Encoder Q. Now again, I have multiple videos on rendering and exporting that go over this topic and all of your best export settings. But I mean, this is a complete guide, so we're going to go through a very quick process of using this. So here we are ready to export, and again, we have a few options to change some of our settings. We can click under here to change our format. So click the blue H.264 text. You also could have clicked the blue text under the preset link. And now this export window might look a little bit more familiar to you. Now it just looks like the regular Premiere exporting, where we have our file format. We have a nice summary of what it's going to be. And then we also have the option to just use our presets up here. So I'm just going to put this to our 4K 75 megabit per second one. We can now scroll down and check we're in 4K. We'll use maximum depth. We're software encoding. Here's our bitrate. Make sure we render at maximum render quality. Now we can click on the name and rename it. Hit OK and we're ready to go. Now again, a really cool thing about Media Encoder is we can duplicate this to make multiple different style of exports. So if we want to make this completely different or a different size, we can definitely do that. Let's name this Export 1080p. We'll go down, we'll unclick this box, and we will change it to be a 1080p file. Everything looks good, and okay. So it's just really cool that Media Encoder allows us to do this. Here is a really important preference we should go change. Go to File, Preferences, and just in the general, we can change the queue before it starts rendering. I believe when you first have it set, it doesn't do this automatically. So let's check that box. Mine is set to 1 minute. I'll change it to 30 seconds here. And once Media Encoder opens, within 30 seconds, it is going to start to export this file for us. Or you can even go up and change it to 0. So then as soon as it opens, it starts exporting. This is just really important. The number of times that I've walked away from my computer after I hit export, thinking that it was going to start, and then I come back and it hasn't even started. And I'd have to hit the play button. This is just a big lifesaver. And anyways, this is it. This will now export whatever versions of your video that you needed. And this brings us to the very end of our process. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. I'm super stoked that you made it to the end. I hope you've learned a ton about After Effects today, and I appreciate you sticking around, keeping me company. Check out other videos if you'd like. Either way, I'm super proud of you. Congratulations on learning Adobe After Effects.